Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Courtney Nash. I am one of the chairs of O'Reilly Media's Velocity Conference on Web Performance and Operations. I'm also an editor at O'Reilly, and I will be your moderator for today's webcast. Joining us today from Keynote, we have Ken Harker. He is a senior performance consultant with Keynote, where he leads the performance consulting practice for the mobile optimized web. Ken works with enterprise customers in the banking, finance, insurance, retail, media, auto, and travel industries, and his goal is to help them improve the performance of their mobile web user experience. He has about a lofty 13 years of experience in this industry, including 9 years with Keynote. We'd like to, speaking of Keynote, begin today's webcast by saying a very big thank you to Keynote Systems for sponsoring the webcast today. I just wanted to say a little bit more about Keynote, who, as an aside, we actually also use for our web and mobile services in terms of monitoring at O'Reilly. So Keynote is the global leader in internet and mobile cloud testing and monitoring. Keynote provides companies with solutions for continuously improving their online experience. With Keynote, companies know precisely how their websites, content, and applications perform on actual browsers, networks, and mobile devices. So thank you again, Keynote Systems. As we're getting started today, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping tips with you all to help you get the most out of today's webcast. First of all, you want to open the group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we'll interact with each other during the event and where you can submit your questions. We always find with these webcasts that you folks in the audience have a lot of great knowledge to share and a lot of really fantastic questions. So please feel free to chat with each other as well during the event. However, if you do have a specific question, please be sure in the chat window to preface that with the capital letter Q, as in question, so that we know that is for Ken, and we can make sure to put it up for Q&A. And I will be pushing some of those questions through to Ken towards the end of our webcast today. On the technical support side, if you have any problems during the event, please take a look at the help widget, which is generally very thorough, but if you continue to have any problems, you can post that in the chat room as well, and one of our staff will help you. People do sometimes run into choppy audio or stalled visuals. Sometimes just a good old refresh will take care of that. And in terms of having a good audio stream, please be sure you're closing any other apps or anything else that could be taking some of that good bandwidth for you. And finally, we are recording today's webcast, and we will have an archive available usually within around 48 hours, and you'll hear about that after the fact. So at this time, let's get started. It's my pleasure to turn the program over now to Ken. Hi, Ken.
Hello, and thank you, Courtney. I'm very excited to be on this presentation today. We'll be going through some very interesting highlights and key findings that Keynote observed in the process of looking at some top mobile retail sites for the shopping season of 2013. 2013 was another record year for online retail. We were very excited to see some of the results, not just for our own customers, but for the industry as a whole. It keeps growing. Every year we see new records being set. In the 2013 shopping season, roughly mid-November through the end of December 2013, the results were excellent. U.S. online and e-commerce holiday retail increased 9.3%, according to the National Retail Federation, compared to a year ago, compared to the 2012 shopping season. In the United Kingdom, the results were even better. UK online holiday retail sales increased 19.2% compared to 2012, according to the British Retail Consortium. Looking forward, we have some excellent market research from Forrester that we like to talk with our customers about. Overall online retail sales in the U.S. For 2014 should be reaching about $300 billion in 2014, and online experience will influence an additional $1.3 trillion in retail purchases. So it's not just about having a great mobile website because you expect people to use it to purchase on their smartphones or on their tablets. The mobile experience has bigger impacts. People will be shopping, window shopping for your products and services while they're on the bus, while they're in your competitors' stores, There's a lot of effort that should be going into mobile simply because it has this enormous influence, not just on purchases made directly over the phone, but over all e-retail channels. So it was a fantastic year. And looking forward, one touch point that we at Keynote like to keep in track with is where is the industry going in the future. And Forrester Research does a great job every year of putting out a state of retailing online, and they did one just recently in January called the State of Retailing Online 2014. Based on data they collected at the end of 2013, one of their key findings in the report, and I encourage everyone to go out and hit up Forrester for a copy of it, is that mobile is a top priority. In fact, it is the top priority for online retailers going into this next 2014 year, particularly in the 2014 holiday shopping season. And we find this very interesting because we feel like we may be at a tipping point in the online retail space where this is the year of mobile. One of the challenges we've seen with the space in recent years is that most retailers are not investing in their mobile sites as much as their desktop sites. And in fact, as I'll show you in the next slide, some of them are not investing nearly enough at all. But we think that we are at the point where, based on these 9%, 19% growth year after year, the fact that mobile is influencing not just the sales made directly on a mobile device, but trillions of dollars in other online sales, 2014 is going to be the year to make a really big change. And it's real madness is just not to be on mobile at all. Internet Retailer did a very interesting recent survey of the top 500 e-retail commerce sites, so the top 500 online retail sites, and determined that of the top 100, only 72 of them have what they would consider a fully functional m-commerce site. So something where you could get on your smartphone, shop for a product, do some searches, add it to a shopping cart, pay for it with a credit card. That means that 28 of those top 100 sites have something less. In very few cases, they have no mobile-optimized site at all. In others, you may be able to shop in a mobile-optimized environment, but you can't actually make a purchase. You have to go to another channel to commit a purchase with the company. And in some, you may have a mobile-optimized homepage, but as soon as you surf away from that to browse for products or to do a search, you end up on the desktop-optimized content. And this, in my mind, is crazy in 2014. With so much at stake, with the mobile commerce market growing by 10 to 20% every year, it's really time, if you're not already on mobile in a big way, to become mobile in a big way. And I think that's one of the lessons we'll learn from the 2013 shopping season as we look at the results of our study. Another key finding about mobile is that the price is right. On the web, there's always a lower price. That's one of the things that retailers need to keep in mind. And just as brick-and-mortar stores can differentiate themselves from their competitors with high levels of customer service, when it comes to the web, it's really performance. It's the user experience on the website that's going to help you keep your customers. It's a double-edged sword, right? A third of customers use their smartphones to comparison shop online while they're shopping in a store. So you may be in your favorite retail store and you're looking at a product on the shelves and you're thinking, maybe I could get that for a lower price online with one of my favorite online retailers. So you pull out your smartphone and you start shopping. The challenge is if that online experience you get on your smartphone in the store is not great, if it takes too long to load the page or you encounter errors or bugs, you're not going to be able to go and grab, you're not going to be able to get the information you need to do the comparison shopping, and you're very likely to just commit to the purchase in the store you're already in. So as an online retailer, having a very fast and efficient and good user experience on your mobile site is critical because a lot of customers are going to be trying to use your site to go away from the store they're at. They've already got the advantage. Your competitors are already at an advantage if your customer or your potential customer is in their store. So you need to give them the very fast user experience to pull those one-third of all consumers toward your online channel instead of your customer's brick-and-mortar channel. 20% of consumers are willing to pay a small premium to get a product on the spot. rather than deal with an online order and shipping delay. So you have to overcome that hump, that speed bump in the way to the online purchase. And the way to do that is to make sure that your mobile optimized site is fast and friendly and very easy to use. Highly performing mobile sites are the ones that consumers are going to turn to when doing comparison shopping, and nobody really wants to wait for pages to load. So what are the expectations? We know that online mobile retail has been growing substantially. We know that the desktop retail space is very hot for online retail. Where do you need to be based on what Keynote knows about the online retail space in order to be successful at doing online retail? Well, we have some standards, and we've looked at this from many different companies have looked at this question. In 2006, Google first began experimenting by adding intentional delay to some of their pages to see at what point would click-through rates go down, at what point would their ad revenue dry up a little bit with additional delay. And surprisingly, they found that delays as short as 1/10 of a second affected their sales ad revenue. 1/10 of a second is extremely fast. That's like blinking your eye. You blink your eye 10 times in a row. It probably takes about a second to do that. And 1/10 of a second actually was enough to impact their ad revenue. That very same year, Amazon experimented as well, adding small little bits of delay to their checkout process to see what the impact would be on sales. And they found that a delay of as small as 1/10 of a second resulted in a 1% revenue loss. So very small amounts of delay can have really significant impact to revenue, conversion, user loyalty to the site. The next big research we looked at was in 2009 when Forrester came out with a sort of groundbreaking study in the retail industry and determined that based on their research that a 2-second user experience time was what you needed to be at for a desktop-based e-retail site in order for your customers to be satisfied. Anything beyond 2 seconds, and you reach points of merely tolerating the site or even going into frustration with the performance of the site. And Forrester followed up again in 2010 with another follow-up study where they determined that half of all site visitors are willing to abandon page loads that take more than 3 seconds. So it's a very, very hard target to meet, but it's one that all retailers have to have in mind if you're going to be successful online. In 2012, the New York Times had a very thorough article that talked to several different experts about performance of retail websites, and the key finding that article noted was that a difference of as little as 1/4 of a second in page load times between your site and that of a key competitor can drive customers to that key competitor's site. If they're 1/4 of a second faster than you, you will start losing customers as a result. So this is a real challenge, and at Keynote, we've decided that the target we should have our customers aiming for on desktop is 2 seconds or faster. That's what we recommend to all our customers. That's the target you should be aiming for, is that the user experience is 2 seconds or faster. Now on mobile, there's a little bit less stringent requirements. Mobile networks are not as fast or consistent as the wired internet. Users have a little more tolerance for some extra delay that they know is inherent in the process of using a mobile device on a 3G network connection. But nevertheless, there is a strong case to be made that performance has to be fast for mobile users as well. In 2011, a company called Strangeloop found that adding an additional 1/2 second of delay for mobile users resulted in fewer return visitors. So they kept track of, if you added extra 500 milliseconds of delay, how likely is that visitor to come back to the site? And they tracked it over a 4-month period, and they could still tell 4 months later those site visitors that had that extra little bit of delay to their first impression of the site were still less likely to return to the site 4 months into the future. So small events can have long implications to how likely users are to continue using your site. Another big thing that happened in 2011 is DoubleClick, a major ad retailer, major ad broker, changed the technical implementation of one of their products a little bit, and it removed a single redirection that had to be made on their site to their site in order to get their ad tags loaded. By optimizing that and removing one round trip over HTTP to enable their service to work, saved over 1 second on average on their mobile customers' sites, and the click-through rates for their ads increased by 12%. So there's a strong imperative to really optimize for web. It's clear that small delays can have big impacts on revenue. And based on what we at Keynote have seen working with many different customers and looking at all the research available to us, we recommend that on mobile you need to be 3 seconds or faster. So this is a real challenge. 2 seconds on desktop, 3 seconds on mobile. So how do you get that? How do you get to be really, really fast? How do you sprint to the finish line with your customers? Well, the delays in page loads, we know result in increased abandonment, decreased loyalty, and loss of revenue. Even very small delays will both result in lost revenue, less likelihood to convert into a sale, can drive your potential customers to the competition, and they can keep them from coming back to your site for months and months later. You really need to be focused on performance, and to succeed, you're going to be looking at performance in milliseconds, not seconds, in order to succeed in the mobile retail space. So that's our motivation. That's what we at Keynote believe is the strong imperative to really drive performance for online retail, and particularly as you go into 2014 for mobile online retail. Every year, Keynote does a study of the holiday shopping experience for a handful of key online retailers. And 2013 was no different. We set up some measurements to look at a handful of key retailers, and we have some key findings that we're going to share with you, some highlights, some of the winners, if you will, of our measurements, and some sense of where the industry is as a whole. And then every year we can look at what we see and try to pull out some key findings, things that are not just unique to one website, but that we see happening across the industry as a whole, and some ideas we have about what can be done to help make sure that if you follow our advice, you will be one of the top performing e-retail sites. So in 2013, we for the first time decided that it was time to do the index not just on desktop, but to do a real three-screen experience. We live in a three-screen world. 6% of the world now has tablet computers, tablets, as opposed to desktop and smartphone. And that 6% share worldwide has happened in just a couple years. You really need to, if you're looking forward to the future of online retail, be looking not just at the desktop and not even just at smartphone, but starting to take into account the tablet user experience as well. So we decided, it's a three-screen world. We're going to look at the online retail experience from a three-screen perspective. We looked at 13 top online retailers. For desktop experience, we measured desktop, smartphone, and tablet. The smartphone and tablet measurements were made on 3G mobile network connections in New York and San Francisco. We didn't do any 4G measurements for this year's study. We made next year. We're still looking at what we think most customers are going to get when they're out and about, and that at the moment is still 3G for many customers. The desktop measurements were taken on high-speed, low-latency network connections using real browsers. For this study, it was Internet Explorer. Next year, we may choose Firefox or Chrome or some other browser. But the idea is we're using real browsers for the desktop measurements to get really high-fidelity sense of what the user's experience actually was. So there were 13 sites in the study. These are big names. You've probably heard of all of them. We at Keynote do have index measurements that look at larger samples of sites. Our mobile commerce index, for example, typically every month looks at 30 top mobile websites and top e-retailer websites that have mobile optimized sites. But for the purpose of this study, we focused on these three sort of representative sites to get a sense of where the industry was. And what did we measure? Well, a lot of Keynote's index measurements that we do on a regular ongoing basis are based on simply the home page loads. And if you look at a lot of other sort of industry comparisons you may find on the internet, a lot of that's based looking at just the homepage experience, which is, of course, a critical part of your customer's experience of your site. It's the first place most of them will go. It's the first chance you have to make an impression on them, not just from a brand impression or a marketing experience, but also from a performance experience. But if a customer is actually going to use your site and shop with you, they're going to have a complete journey through your site. We like to talk about user journeys. as what you want to measure, because it really gives you a sense of what the overall user experience is going to be. You do start at the home page, of course, but in our particular user journey that we used for this study, we then immediately began searching for a product like a camera or a television. We filtered the search results based on price or some other criteria to try to see how the filter process worked. We then viewed a product details page, and depending on the site, some of those are extremely heavy. Is it going to get some errors, or is it going to be lightweight? We want to know those kind of things. And then we added the product to a cart. So we don't actually go through the process of buying the product. We don't commit to a sale. We're taking these measurements every 15 minutes from multiple locations around the country, 24/7, from 13 different sites. We're not going to go through the process of buying 30,000 cameras to do this study. So we go all the way up to the part where you have to enter credit card information or some kind of personal details, and we stop the flow at that point. But we get a good sense of the overall holistic nature of the site and what it takes to actually go from the home page through a purchase. It gives us a sense to exercise different parts of the site, static content like the home page that's probably the same page as getting out to everybody. Doing a search, of course, is critical for any retail site to get a sense of how fast that process is. Product details pages where you have a chance to either serve a very fast experience or a potentially slow experience depending on the amount of content you want to serve. And, of course, the cart process, which has state information that's unique to the particular site visitor. Are the back-end servers able to do that quickly or not? We did the same flow on desktop, smartphone, and tablet. So I'm going to go through some of the top findings, give you some highlights of what we found on desktop, smartphone, and tablet, and then afterwards I will follow up with 7 key things lessons that we learned and wanted to pass on to the e-retail community based on what we saw in the Keynote data. So we'll start first with the desktop results. So our user journey of shopping on the desktop, starting at the home page, searching for an item, filtering the search, looking at the product details page, and adding to a cart, on average, across all 13 of these sites, took 22.8 seconds. This was actually a very stable transaction. Over the course of mid-November to the end of December, over about a 6-week period, the weekly averages for this transaction on desktop varied by less than a half second, which means that at any point in time during the retail shopping season, it would take you about the same amount of time on average across these 13 sites to do a purchase. The slowest week was the 3rd week of December, which probably makes sense. That may have been the time when most sites were experiencing the highest volume. When this, on average, across all 13 sites, the purchase transaction took about 23.2 seconds. So that's a difference of roughly 0.4 seconds from the average. It's not that big of a deal. The fastest week was the 1st week of December, which again may have corresponded with the lightest volume. A lot of customers either purchase something right after Thanksgiving in late November, or they'll be purchasing it closer to the day of Christmas in the 3rd week of December. But the fastest week was only 22.7 seconds. So over the course of the entire holiday period, there was not much change for the industry as a whole. Effectively, visitors saw no meaningful difference during the shopping season. So of the steps we looked at, again, we're looking at a 5-step user journey. The slowest step was search results. It wasn't the home page, it was search results. Across all the measured sites, 46% of the sites had the search results step was the slowest portion of the user journey. So if you're in charge of an online retail site for desktop, you want to make a little bit of an effort to ensure that your product search is as fast as it can be, because that seems to be the pain point for the industry as a whole. The home pages load quickly, product details pages are fine. The place where people are most likely to be frustrated because of slow performance on the desktop side is going to be the search results page. And in many cases, there are mainly 2 reasons why a search results page could be slow. It could be that the actual search on the back end takes a long time, but we saw on more than one site that the reason the search results page was very slow is that the content that was returned was exceptionally heavy. And the more content you load on a page, the longer it takes for the page to load. So you have to find the right balance between fast searches and enough content to make the user happy, but not too much that it slows down the page experience. The overall winner on the desktop side was Apple. Apple took an average of only 14 seconds during the holiday season to get through the process of going to the home page, searching for an item, filtering the search, looking at some product details, and adding it to the cart. The industry average was about 23 seconds. So Apple is close to half the amount of time it takes the industry is on average to do it. Very good performance. And if you think about the Apple website, many of you have probably visited it or at least seen it. It doesn't look like it's stripped down or some kind of cut rate site that's fast because it's not giving you a good media experience. It looks very nice. It's very aesthetically pleasing, and it's still very fast. When we looked at the slowest site in the study on average, one of the main reasons it was extremely slow is that it was extremely heavy. To go through a 5-step flow on that slowest site, we ended up downloading nearly 7 megabytes of data, and some pages on that slowest site had over 200 network requests to load all the content on each page. That's 200 round trips from the web browser to the server and back. By comparison, Apple's site only loaded 2 megabytes of total data during this 5-step flow through the site, and never once in any of those 5 pages did the Apple site require more than 100 elements or 100 round trips to the server in order to load the page. So it's certainly possible to have a very nice looking page that gives good results and does it very quickly. And in the holiday 2013 shopping season on desktop, Apple was the site that did that the best. The site that was the most available during this time period was HP, an overall transaction uptime of 99.6%. So at Keynote, we often talk about overall availability or transactional availability. And when we talk about 99.6% in this result, what I mean is that 99.6% of the time, we could go through all 5 steps of this flow without encountering an error on any of the pages. So to get to 99.6 overall for a user journey, you really need to have 99.9 or 100% availability on every page. It's a very high standard to try to meet. And overall, for the 13 sites we looked at, all of them did very well. We had no site that was below 99% overall. They were all very close to the 99.4, 99.5, 99.6 range. It's a very high standard, but all the sites are achieving it, so you can't slip at all during the holiday season. We had just one site out of the 13 that had any kind of sustained outage or downtime. That site had a small outage from 0300 to 0500 in the morning of December 27, when most of the site actually was working, but the search function was returning no results. That was the only noticeable event or outage on any of these 13 sites during the holiday shopping season, and that one I would argue is probably not that significant since it impacted the middle of the night 2 days after Christmas. But the lesson we learned from that, of course, is that every site is going to be highly available. Every site is going to have very good uptime, and if you want to compete, you have to be meeting some pretty exceptional standards. 99.6% for a purchase path is certainly something that you should be striving for on the desktop. So some key findings for the smartphone arena. One thing that we can tell you about the smartphone measurements is that of these sites we looked at, nearly all the pages we encountered were designed for both the smartphone screen size and for use over mobile network connections. So optimizing for those two things are not necessarily the same. It's certainly possible to optimize content so that it looks great on a small screen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's been optimized for use over slower, high-latency mobile networks. Overall, the user experience on smartphones continues to be much slower than on desktop, and it's not entirely the fault of the slow mobile network connections. There's certainly some elements of design to it, but that continues to be the story. Someday I hope that we will look at smartphone measurements and say that they are just as fast as desktop, but we're not there yet. In fact, during our study period, the average time to complete a transaction to get all the way from the home page to the cart took 32.1 seconds, or roughly 10 seconds longer than the desktop user experience. It was also less consistent. Throughout the holiday study, the weekly averages ranged from 28.6% in early December, 28.6 seconds rather, in early December, to 35.7 seconds in the third week of December. Certainly a lot more variation than you see on the desktop. So it seems that the mobile sites were more sensitive to, extra traffic or load or more activity going on the mobile networks during certain times of the holiday shopping season. Much less consistent experience than what we saw on desktop. The slowest site in the study for this period had an average of 54.8 seconds to complete the shopping path, or roughly 3 times as slow as what the average desktop experience was during this shopping season. So there's obviously a lot of work that these retail sites can still be doing to improve the mobile user experience. Overall, the slowest page on the mobile retail experience was not search results, it was the home page. One of the challenges with mobile is that it's a very high latency network environment, and so some of the activities that happen on the home page and are unique to the home page suffer because of high latency. Every time you make a connection to a new server, you have to potentially be doing a DNS lookup to map the domain name to an IP address. You'll have to do a new TCP connection. If it's a secure site, you may have to do an SSL connection. All of these are activities that are very sensitive to high latency. And more of those activities happen on the home page than any other point in a user transaction or a user journey on a site. Retailers really need to focus on optimizing the home page experience on mobile. That's the place where users are going to be most likely to be frustrated by slow performance. And if customers are going to potentially abandon your site after 3 seconds, you really need to focus on making sure that that first 3 seconds count. The search results pages were the next slowest page on average for mobile site visitors, for smartphone visitors, but it sort of paled in comparison in terms of scope to the homepage experience. You really need to have a fast homepage experience unless you're willing to risk people abandoning and not completing the transaction before they even get to the search. Overall, the winner for the smartphone side of things was Sony, the Sony Style Store. Sony has many, many different web properties. The one we measured was specifically Sony Style, where you would actually go if you were to shop for a camera or a laptop as a consumer. It came in with an average time of 19.7 seconds to complete the overall path, which compares not unfavorably to a desktop experience. Right? The typical desktop experience was about 22 seconds. So Sony is actually able on their mobile site to do as well in terms of performance as a typical desktop user would experience. So that's an example where there are sites out there that can achieve high performance. It is possible, and Sony did a good job. The study average was 32.1 seconds, so Sony is about 30% faster than the industry as a whole. The slowest of the smartphone sites actually was not Apple. So Apple was the one site in our study that does not have a smartphone-optimized website. If you go in your mobile phone, including an Apple iPhone, and you type in www.apple.com, you will get the full desktop version of their website. Apple does have a mobile app for which they hope that you will use to shop when you're using a mobile device. But if you're not willing to install the mobile app, or you're just trying to get some quick price information and you just want to look at it on your browser, they will give you the full desktop experience. And you would naturally expect that would result in them being the slowest. But it actually wasn't the case. We had a site that was slower than Apple that averaged 54.8 seconds to complete the user journey. Its site was designed to take advantage of the mobile screen real estate. The images were sized properly. The buttons and controls and the general look and feel of the site was designed with the mobile screen in mind, but it was actually slower than its competitors that served the full desktop versions of their site. So it's possible to have a site that looks good on a mobile device and maybe has acceptable performance over Wi-Fi, but is terrible when you have a 3G network connection involved. Tablet results. So this is an interesting area. We looked at the tablet measurements with 3G mobile network connections. So most tablet sites, in fact all the ones in this study, if you go to the retail website with a tablet browser, you will get the exact same version of the site that the desktop user gets. Most retail sites have identified the fact that the screen real estate is large enough on a typical 8 to 10-inch tablet that the full desktop layout, look and feel is appropriate for that kind of screen. And so that's what they serve. And a lot of tablet users are on Wi-Fi, they're on high-speed network connections, and they're probably getting more or less exactly the same kind of performance experience that you would get with a desktop browser. So we thought it would be interesting to look at, what is the experience of a tablet user on 3G? Because many tablets do have the ability to connect over mobile network connections. And even if you don't, you may be in situations where you don't have the best network connection. You may be in an airport or on a bus using Wi-Fi that doesn't have a very good backhaul connection to the internet. I've been in many cases sitting in airports that have free Wi-Fi, and the Wi-Fi is pretty terrible. So the question is, what does the tablet user experience look like if you're on a high latency mobile network connection? And the short answer is it really wasn't very good. Retailers are essentially gambling that tablet users are always on fast Wi-Fi connections. None of them optimized their site with the idea that a tablet user may be coming in on a poor quality or high latency mobile network connection. And unfortunately, everybody saw very poor performance. The average for the industry was 61.4 seconds, or roughly 3 times as slow for a tablet over 3G as a smartphone over 3G. So if you're operating a retail site and you're used to looking at the desktop version, you're thinking, okay, that's pretty fast. The pages are loading in about 2 seconds on average. The tablet user is going to see something similar. That's true if and only if the tablet user is on a good network connection. If they're on a mobile network connection or on a poor Wi-Fi connection, they could be seeing user experiences that are 6 or 8 times as bad. And that's where you risk having abandonment and customers not coming to your site. Right now, the industry has done essentially nothing to accommodate those users. So they're either writing them off as a not significant enough population to worry about, or they're gambling that those users will choose other means to do e-retail business with them. Either they'll switch to their desktop computer or they'll pull out their smartphone to continue to interact with the site. So at this point, that was our top-level findings. We have a few lessons. I have 7 kind of key findings we encountered that span all of the websites that we looked at in this e-retail study. The biggest point of frustration we know for mobile web users is slow page loads. And mobile needs to be a continuing focus for e-retailers to succeed. So some of these recommendations have a more urgent, are more urgent for the mobile site, but they all apply to both desktop and mobile. So let's go through some 7 key findings we had for e-retailers. So the first one is what we call dress light. It's really important, particularly on mobile, but it also does benefit the desktop experience, to have as few elements as possible on your web pages. To be disciplined about using the least number of round trips over the network to accomplish what you need to do and give the user the experience you want to give them. The fewer elements you have, the less latency is involved in the network, the less overhead there is to get your content into the browser, and also the fewer chances there are for something to go wrong, the less likelihood that the page will fail to load because one asset that was critical had an issue. One of the sites this holiday season actually improved their results a bit during the course of the holiday season by reducing the number of third-party elements on their page. So marketing analytics tags, for example, things like Omniture, Google Analytics, things that the business side loves to get because they tell you who your customers are, where they're coming from, what kind of other sites they visit, lots of good information. But depending on where they load on a page and how many of them you have, they can adversely impact your user's experience. And we saw some examples during the holiday season where a site did make some slight adjustments to their use of their third-party analytics services, and it did improve their performance a little bit during the course of the study. In general, for mobile, we recommend, if you really want to be fast on smartphones, your smartphone-optimized site should aim for 20 or fewer HTTP requests and 200 kilobytes or fewer per page. And you can do better than that on desktop. You can have 50 to 100 requests, and you may be able to get away with 500 kilobytes to a megabyte on desktop. But for mobile, you really need to be very disciplined and try to do as much as you can with 20 round trips over the network and 200 kilobytes or less in data. Another recommendation we have is what we call avoid long lines. So different browsers and phones have different numbers of parallel threads. So what does that mean? It's a technical issue with how browsers load content over the network. Most browsers have the ability to make multiple requests in parallel for content. So if you have 6 images on a page, most browsers can request all 6 of them at the same time and load them in 6 parallel threads. And this improves the performance of how fast that content can get into the browser. But there are some elements on the page, particularly JavaScript, that the browsers will not load in parallel. So JavaScript, in order to work right, has to load in a consistent order. If you have multiple script files on a page and they load in different orders, potentially they could have different executions. The behavior of the page could change. So in order to save us from ourselves, the browsers, when they encounter JavaScript, often will only load one element at a time. So it's very important when you have a page design that uses JavaScript, and all e-retailers do, that this is kept in mind, and that if an element does cause this serialization or blocking of other content on the page, that it's done in a way that strategically has the least impact on the user experience. We saw many cases in the study where sites had JavaScript frameworks that loaded at the top of the page, and a single request could delay most of the image content on the page by 1 or 2 seconds because it blocked or serialized the download flow. And this is something that you really need to pay attention to from a performance standpoint. And I would say this is probably the second most important recommendation we can make. A third lesson we learned is that it pays to bundle up. Now, I told you just 2 slides ago that dressing light is important. And by bundling up, I mean something along the same lines, actually. A lot of sites in the e-retail space are very image heavy. Lots of, if you want to give lots of good product images, lots of good visual look and feel on, different colors, for example. If you're apparel, you may have a lot of, the ability for the customer to see a particular clothing item in a dozen different colors, and so you have lots of little images for each color swatch on the page. There's a lot of opportunity to have lots of small images. And the thing about TCP connections over the internet is that small content files, like a 2 kilobyte image file, it's very inefficient to make a lot of requests for small image files. Every time you request a 2 kilobyte file, for example, the content of that file can come back in a single packet, usually, over the network. But there's a lot of overhead. You have the request time to make it, the first byte delay on the server, and it may take more time and overhead to request that element than it does to actually transmit the data. It's much more efficient to have, say, a single 20 kilobyte file sent over the network than to make 10 requests for 2 kilobyte files. And so there are some great techniques, the most important of which you should know about is called cascading style sheet sprites, or CSS sprites, that will enable you to bundle up some of these small assets into larger assets that you can use to make fewer requests over the network but still get exactly the same content on the screen that you had before. Anything you can do to reduce the number of round trips over the network will benefit, and bundling up things like small images is a great way to do that. A fourth lesson we have is anticipating the rush. Most e-retailers, certainly the 13 that we looked at, seem to be doing this okay, but you know it's coming. You know there's going to be a big retail push in late November, early December 2014. Why wait until the holidays to prepare? You should be doing things like load testing your site early. If you're trying to arrange with a vendor to do some load testing on your site in early September, you've probably waited too long. You need to be getting that on your calendar in the summer, because most load testing vendors have the same big rush that you have, except for them it's the September, October, November time period that's their big rush, and you need to make sure that you're on their calendars during those time periods, that you've reserved your spots for that kind of service. Benchmarking the performance of your site relative to your competition during the course of the year is important, but making sure that you're ready to go in the September-October timeframe requires preparing for that a little bit earlier and making sure that you've got your load testing plan in a full readiness during the summer. Number 5, we call this resist the marketing. And I know this is a hard pill to swallow for some of my audience members here, but we know that good marketing can improve conversion rates. And if somebody's already shopping on your site, maybe putting up a nice promotional banner that says, hey, this is an extra special good deal today, you may actually get more sales out of that. But the challenge is to find the right balance. We actually had one site during the holiday season that made some small changes to one of their pages to do a little bit of promotional pushing of some sale items. The problem was that they added so much content to that one page that the promotional images actually, the content was twice as much as what the page originally weighed. And this was on one of the mobile smartphone sites. And so basically the size of that page tripled for a short period of time due to this promotion. And that had some significant performance impact to the users that were going through that page. Now, sometimes it's worth it, right? Depends on what the page is and how much those promotions actually result in increased revenue. But it's always important to keep in mind that the more you add promotional content to a page, the worse the performance is likely to be. And there's a risk that by trying to over-promote something, you may actually be driving people away by giving them bad performance. So we saw some performance impact with this during the study, and it's important to make sure that if you're considering doing that, particularly during a peak holiday shopping season, that you strike the right balance, that you know that what you're doing is worthwhile and will, on balance, be the right thing for your business. Partner up. So one of the lessons we learned is that the loads that these sites see during peak holiday shopping season is quite significant, and we believe that every one of the sites we looked at uses a content distribution network to help them deal with it. So if you're not familiar with content distribution networks, content delivery networks, these are services where you can push the content of your website out to edge servers, as they sometimes call them, all over the United States, for example, if your market is the United States. And so when customers come to visit you, they're not having to go all the way back to your web servers in your one city in the United States. They're going to servers that are very close to themselves, and this helps reduce the amount of network latency involved, and those servers are not under the same load that they would be if everyone in the country was coming to a single location. They really help spread the load out, they help improve performance, and they can give the users a much better experience. One thing that's important about content delivery networks, though, is that you really need to monitor the performance of your site to know that they're doing what they say they're doing, that you're getting the value out of it that you want to get out of it, that everything is tuned properly, that the timeouts, expiration times, and so forth are done so that the content is staying on the edge servers as long as it can without having any issues. As far as I can tell, all the sites we looked at were using content delivery networks, and I would expect any of the top 100 sites in the e-retail index will be using content delivery networks. Certainly, it's definitely worthwhile for large retailers to do that. And then finally, a last great tip we come up is, expect the unexpected. Stuff is going to happen. It pays to be prepared in advance, but you know that something's going to happen during the holidays. We actually only had one retailer that had more than a single hour of downtime, and even then it was sort of a partial downtime in that much of the site still worked, but some of it didn't. Unfortunately, when that went down, the search didn't just fail. It presented a page not found error for several hours. So it would have been nice, and you should prepare for this, that things may go wrong with the site. It's very good to be able to show the user some kind of apology message, something that looks nicer than just a generic browser, sorry, this page can't be found. It will do a great deal to improve the user feedback. They may be willing to wait. If it's a planned maintenance, make sure you say, hey, we'll be back at 5 in the morning. Just come back in a couple hours. We'll be ready for you then. That can go a long way toward improving the user experience. And of course, if you are going to have maintenance events, and there's no way to avoid it during the peak holiday season, make sure they're at the off hours of the day. 3 to 5 a.m. Eastern time is probably the best option. To make sure that users don't see that unexpected, oh, I can't do shopping business with you right now kind of experience. So conclusions. So what did we learn from the 2013 holiday shopping season? It was a record year for e-retailers, huge growth in the industry, 9% in the United States, almost 19% in the United Kingdom, growing leaps and bounds every year. None of the desktop sites in our study had major performance events or availability failures prior to December 25. There's really no room for you to slip in this business, and what we saw in 2013 is that none of the big sites that we looked at had any slips. So you really can't screw up at all, or you're going to look much worse than any of your competitors because they're not going to screw up. Mobile site performance in general continues to lag. Despite the fact that everyone says it's their top priority, it still can be 50%, 40% slower than what the desktop user gets. Now that gap may close over time as the mobile network technologies improve, as more people move on to LTE or even faster mobile network connection speeds. But it's still true that you can do something today to close that gap for your own website. The fastest mobile sites had experience that was comparable to the industry average on desktop. It is possible, and I think it's a high priority for all e-retailers to try to stretch and reach for that kind of goal going into 2014. Tablet users on mobile network connections continue to receive horrendously slow user experiences. The average is still 3 to 4 times as bad as what desktop users experience. Will this change in 2014? I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of interest in mobile retailers doing something specifically for tablet users on poor network connections. If your site does, you may be one of the first. You may be able to capture a nascent and very fast-growing market. So, in conclusion, we think 2014 may be a tipping point for mobile. This may be the year that a lot of sites get even more serious about mobile and try to close that gap. It certainly looks like that is the trend in terms of users getting onto mobile. And we look forward to next year when we'll be doing this study in some form or another again and to share your results with that next year. So with that, I guess thank you. And I guess we're ready to take questions or comments.
Yeah, I've been watching the questions come in the chat room here, and I just wanted to underscore one thing before we dive into the questions. I know you talk a lot of the number 5 point about sort of trying to resist the urge and the pull of marketing, and I think this is a hard sell for a lot of people internally, and it's really easy to get into sort of back and forth arguments between the two teams, and so, it's nice to see studies like this, and one of the things that I really want to encourage people to do is be as data-driven as possible. And so, one thing that you didn't bring up as much here, but I think you talked a little bit about it, is if you're not doing any kind of A/B testing yet, that's really important to be doing here as well. You can do A/B testing with and without that, marketing and looking at different performance impacts on your site. Then you've got data to support the trade-offs between adding marketing content and slowing down the performance of your site. And that can help you make some really informed decisions versus just sort of arguing back and forth about what seems like it might be more important. So
yeah, and that also goes to the, don't wait until the last minute to try these things recommendation. You'd be surprised how many customers come to a company like Keynote that does load testing in mid-October with the idea that, hey, we need to do a load test before the holiday rush. Well, at that point, it's really hard to get on the calendars to try that out. It's also true that it's kind of late to start doing A/B tests at that point. Yeah. You really need to start doing that in the summer to have a handle on your plans in time for the holidays.
And if you find something you need to fix in October, well, you're probably getting that fixed by January maybe, right? I mean, depending on what your turnaround time is on certain things. So, yeah, that's absolutely right. So I want to jump in and hit some of these questions. We don't have a huge amount of time left, so I'm going to concatenate a few together because we did have a couple of questions from folks that were related or similar. So RB had asked whether you all had some comparative data or any sort of information on whether certain kinds of UI or front-end techniques really helped or hindered with performance. So RB was asking, specifically I don't know if you guys looked at this, but did HTML5 help a specific site better? And Anish had asked a similar question, whether you have any data on sort of single-page applications versus traditional page-by-page design, and whether you all looked at that or had any other kinds of data on those types of UI techniques and impacts on performance.
That's an excellent question. Yeah, so the particular technologies that sites use to implement themselves can vary. Some of the sites were HTML5 compliant, others were not. On mobile smartphones, I think almost all of them were HTML5 based at this point. The biggest challenge is that it's not what specific technology you use. It's really the thing that I see that's the biggest issue, particularly on mobile, is when you use a JavaScript framework, for example, some of them will have the behavior where they block the download process as they're loading their key library files. And so you can have like all the images on a page being delayed by a second and a half while you wait for this one JavaScript library to load. It's important that whatever technology you pick, whether it's a particular JavaScript framework or a particular other approach, that when you profile the performance of the page, you look for things like that are sort of performance bottlenecks. And anything that will serialize the download where only one thing can be loading at a time, that's sort of the key thing that I look for when I go in and profile the performance of a page, because that can really string out, a single slow element can have a huge impact on the user experience, particularly if it's happening early in the page load, and especially if it's happening before initial page render. Those are the really critical areas that you want to be very, very careful about when it comes to picking a particular JavaScript framework or a particular technology to implement your site around.
Yeah, and I mean, along those lines, I think RV sort of followed up and asked whether you had any comparisons on the back end, what you can peek into or even infer on that end from your guys' perspective.
So in general, the back-end performance issue that we saw standing out most from this study was the search process. So most of the pages are either mostly static content, like the home page or a product details page. There's not a lot that's unique to your visit about that page. And so we didn't see any real server-side issues. But the two areas where you do have potential server-side issues are doing a search. How fast does that search take? And that varied a bit over the different sites. And then potentially, anytime you interact with a cart system, that's you're establishing a unique session for you in the shopping flow. There's always the potential that there could be server-side issues with that. But I'd say in general, the search function, particularly on desktop, was the slowest point of the desktop user experience. And so if you were going to try to profile one application call to make faster, in general, it probably should be the call that does a search for products on your site.
Great. So we had a question in from Zach Pry, which was, he said, usually desktop and mobile versions don't provide equal functionality, with mobile being what he calls a quote-unquote cut version of the desktop. Was this the case for those retailers? And what are customer expectations regarding this? I definitely have a few things to say about this, but I want to hear what you had to say, what you guys thought.
So that's been the challenge for the last few years, is that as companies start investing in mobile, some of them have made the decision not to be fully invested in it. The Internet Retailer Survey that I cited early on in the presentation here does show that about 3/4 of all the top e-retail sites have a fully functional m-commerce site. You can do exactly the same thing on the smartphone that you can do on desktop. But that does mean that there's a quarter that it's not. Of the particular 13 sites that we looked at in our metrics, Apple was the only one that didn't have a fully functional mobile commerce site. The other 12 did. And I think the expectation over time is that Apple will be a very rare exception probably 2 years from now is my guess.
Yeah, and I wanted to chime in on this a bit, because it's one thing to say they're different. It's another thing to say that the mobile version is cut. I think it's important to understand the user experience use cases on a device-by-device basis, or I'm not saying like fragmented all the way down to like this version of Android to that or something, if you're getting into that world. But I think it is important to understand that somebody looking on a smartphone might have a different, and you talked about this in terms of how tablets tend to be closer to the desktop experience. So it doesn't, you want to provide all that functionality, but you might not give the UI or into that functionality the same kind of treatment that you would on a phone that you would, say, on the site. And so to say that they're different is not necessarily a bad thing, was all I just wanted to underscore it. I actually think if you think a lot more about the user experience and the use cases of somebody on a mobile phone, you should be providing a fundamentally different experience that in the end they still are able to sort of transact the same kinds of things.
I agree.
Yeah, so So then the next question that I wanted, there are a couple questions just around the study itself, and then we're going to work on closing up here. So 2 questions on this front. Were you able? How much did you guys sort of mimic what you believe to be sort of the set of mobile devices that are typically used right now? Network conditions, geographic conditions. those kinds of things, how much do you guys feel that reflects reality out there?
Yeah, so Keynote does a lot of competitive studies, and we have the ability to do a huge variety of different mobile devices. We have lots of points of presence from which we can take measurements. For this particular, retail study that we did, we focused on 10 market locations for desktop. So we have 10 cities around the United States from which we took our measurements. On mobile, we did it from 2 locations, New York and San Francisco. For desktop, we used Internet Explorer 9 as our reference browser. So we did exactly, we use a real browser, so we're surfing just like a real user would with Internet Explorer. And on mobile, we used the Apple iPhone 5 and the Apple iPad 3, the non-Air iPad, the version just before the iPad Air, as our reference platforms. We certainly can do, Android devices, Android tablets. We had anything you want, Windows Mobile. But for this particular study, we focused on those 2 reference platforms.
Okay. Fantastic. And so as we're going to close out here, I'm going to pick this last question from Toby because I think it actually segues into nicely about talking about Keynote and thanking you all for sponsoring the webcast today. So Toby asked, do you and how do you help clients make their sites faster?
Oh, there's lots of ways. It starts, first of all, with having a performance management plan means that you need to do several things. One, you need to make sure that your culture within your organization values performance. And at Keynote, we like to talk with customers about how you build that kind of commitment. And then it starts with measuring. You can't manage what you don't measure. So you have to have some kind of performance measurement program where you take actual data of your site to understand what's going on. And then, of course, you take that data and you need to distill it down through some process of analysis to come up with what are the key pain points my customers experience and what can I do about them. And there's all sorts of ways you can do that. We have many tools. We have a whole consulting practice at Keynote that helps customers manage that process. That's one of the things I do for most of my working day is help customers go through that process of I've got this ton of data. What do I do with it? How do I turn it into something that will benefit my business? So Keynote certainly takes that on as our primary goal is to help customers, take their performance measurement program directly related to the business objectives they have and help them drive to that objective.
So there you go, Toby. The answer is yes.
Yes.
And I haven't seen any other questions come in, and so I just dropped my phone, which is always fun. So sorry about that, folks. I just wanted to say a huge thank you, Ken, for presenting a really informative webcast. There's a lot of data out there around this stuff, but I feel like you guys have put a really nice point on this that can help people go back to their own organizations and present some of this information to help do that evangelizing you're talking about making performance a priority within their organization as well. And so my last thank you again is to Keynote Systems for sponsoring today's webcast. It's on the last slide here. I just want to reinforce for you folks, a global leader in internet and mobile cloud testing and monitoring. As Ken said, they don't just provide the tools, they have consulting as well, so solutions for continuously improving your customer's online experience so you know precisely how your website's content and applications perform across all of these, as Ken was saying, all kinds of browsers, network conditions, mobile devices. So thank you all so much for joining us. You'll hear more information after the fact about the slides being available. And that's the end of today's webcast. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Ken and Courtney. This is Audra here, and O'Reilly wants to give you a huge thank you. And Ken, was there anything you'd like to leave with the audience before taking off today?
No, I thank everyone who chose to take the time to attend and listen to me talk. And we'll be glad to follow up if anybody has questions and you want to get a copy of the deck. My email address is in there, and I'll be happy to hook you up with the right resource, be it myself or someone else at Keynote, if you want to follow up with anything about our study, our methodology, performance management in general. We're happy to reach out to the community and help where we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And just a reminder, audience, we will have an archive sent to you via email, and you can access the chat log and the slides there as well. So thank you all again, and have a good morning, afternoon, or evening to wherever you all are from. This concludes the webcast. Goodbye.